Hello and welcome to our Ranorex webinar, Mastering User Code in Ranorex Studio. My name is Andreas, and it's a pleasure to be your host today. Let me first start with a short introduction and a few facts. The target audience for today's webinar is at practitioner's level, which means it would be good if you have some programming experience. There's no need for any preparation. The test application, as well as the complete example, is available for download from within our download server, and I will point that out at the end of today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and of course, it will be available for you offline afterwards. The duration of today's webinar will be approximately 1 hour. We have an interesting and quite extensive program for today, so let's start into it. And I would like to start by, showing you what we will learn today. So first of all, I would like to, show you the code representation of actions. Then we will do some conversion between actions into user code actions and modify them. And we will learn how to pass arguments to user code actions and see resulting types, return values of actions. Of course, we will start to create our own user code modules, and I will introduce to you the concept of module variables and their application, and to show you of how to pass values into code modules and receiving them out. And of course, we will do some implementation of user code-based validation. Some topics along the way will be the use and application of arguments and variables when it comes to user code. And of course, I would like to show you how to access the repository items from within user code, which is a very helpful feature. Hopefully, some useful tips and tricks in between. Someone is telling me that he cannot hear me, but I guess if more than 200 people can hear me, then it must be your issue and not on our side. And hopefully you can fix that. Yes, so I would say let's start into it. And let me see what we have prepared so far. I will go for Ranorex Studio now, and I have prepared a test solution. It's a very simple test solution which uses our demo application. I simply first would like to let it run and see what's going on here so that you can see it. So it's within the test suite, we're starting our demo application, which most of you might already know. We're typing in a name into the introduction panel, submit it, we validate the welcome message, finally click the reset button and close the application. So what we're going to do is we're starting the application, we're inserting a name, clicking the submit button, validating if the welcome message changes here. So again, I open it up here. So we are validating, let me point it out by the spotlight, if the welcome message changes. It's a very basic explanation example. Click the reset button here again and finally end the application. And the purpose of today's webinar is I will replace every single recording module within this simple test by a code module. So I will show you how to insert values or strings into text field, how to click buttons, how to make use of the repository items and stuff like that. So along the way, we will replace every single recording module here by a code module. So this is today's plan. And yes, I would like to start by showing you the code representation of an action. So let's open up the recording module, which is called button submit. I will first close the report now. It's not very interesting for the moment. And it's interesting to see that every action within Ranorex Studio has its own code representation. And by right-clicking an action and viewing the code here, selecting view code, we could step into the automatically created code, which is behind here. And if we go up to the beginning, then it's important to mention that this file was automatically generated by Ranorex, and it's not intended to be modified or changed or something like that. So all the modifications which are done here would be lost. So it doesn't make sense to do that. It's just to make you see that it's what is underneath here. So it's code written in C#. I will show you how to convert to Visual Basic just in a couple of moments. So we have a class definition here. Of course, we have some we have some constructors here, an empty constructor, and a definition to a code definition like the run module here, which always consists of a log line into the report, some action like the clicking on the button here, and a small delay which causes the simulation of some user interaction. And just to show you how this links, if I step into the action now here, and let's say we have an action spot by default, which is somehow based on coordinates. So if I change this from the coordinates to this, first of all, I should show you here, we have it here too. So here we have the coordinates represented in here in the click action. And if I change this, for example, now to center position and store it, and we step back to the code, then you see it has been removed here. So this is now without any argument, the click method is centered. Or if you see, for example, here the delay here, and we step back to the action and we activate the turbo mode of this recording module and save it and step back, then you see that there's no delay anymore. So this is a very close connection between the automatically generated code and the recording module here. So the coding details available and useful will be explained very soon. I will step on to the next part here, and let me close this here. You also see here that if we view the code, that you have a so-called a locked symbol here. You can see that this code file is locked, and that's another information that you should not change that. And if it comes to the recording modules here in my projects file view, and I open up the recording module button submit recording, then you see we have two code representations here. So the first code representation is the one we already have opened now. So this is the locked one. And the second one is the user code based code module. So this will be the code module where we could do some modifications. So it has prepared an init method here, and within here, our recording specific initialization code goes in here. So this is the place where we can modify user code files. And I will show you how to do that right in a second. But let me first show you something different. Ranorex supports code written in C# and Visual Basic.NET. And we can automatically convert from one to another. So if you open up the projects menu, and then you find a conversion here, and I could now, because my default code base is C# here, but I could easily convert into Visual Basic.NET. So once I clicked it here, then I have done a conversation with a result here. And what I have down there is a completely converted code base written in Visual Basic. And if I open here the button submit user code, then we have the represented Visual Basic.NET code base here. So this is what I easily can do. I don't want to do that for the moment, so we are working with the C# code base today. So I would like to present all the examples in C#, and you could do that with your conversion on your own. So let me go on, and let's see how to create our own user code method here. So let me again open up the submit button, submit recording module, and let's convert this mouse click action into a user code action. To do this, I right click it and I choose now to convert into user code. Currently, we have two methods available here. I could simply convert it into user code or into user code with a return value. It doesn't matter if you choose what you choose, because you could convert every method into some method returning a value. But this are the predefined options here. So I convert it to a user code, and I should give it a name. I could go for the default name, but I also can give it a name, and I just call it click button submit. So this is how I call this method. And what you can see here now is, let me point that out with the spotlight here. So we have now a user code method. It's not a mouse click action anymore. It has a name, it's the click button submit method, and it has an argument which is of a repository item information. I will point it out a little bit later, because of course almost every action is somehow related to a repository item, and we need to transfer this item into the user code somehow, and this is done by an argument. So that's why we have it here. So double clicking this method opens up the user code, and what you already can see here is that we have, of course, a prepared user code here. So we have our method's name here, click button submit. We have the repository item being transferred as an argument. And down there we have two actions here. The first one is inserting a report information line into the report. And the second one is to perform this click action on the repository item itself. So this is finally where it has been converted to. So yes, now we could easily modify that, of course. So first of all, let me check for here. So I would like to comment it a little bit. So let's raise a warning message instead of an information message. So we have different report levels, and if we replace here the information message by a warning message, then we raise a warning instead. So what else could we do? Here the clicking the button is left as it is, so we are performing the click action here. But what I could do down there is I could insert a delay. So let's insert a small delay, and let's go for, as you can see, we have helping hands here. As soon as I start typing some code, I have helping hands. So let's the delay go for seconds, and let's define 2 seconds as a delay. And let me also inform about this within the report. So let's go for the report log file, and let's do it with a report level. So report level dot info, and let's say, yeah, waiting for 2 seconds. So this is what I'm gonna do here. So what I do now is I leave the report message as it was. Instead of I'm raising a warning now, then we perform the mouse click action, and afterwards we have a report message again that we wait for 2 seconds, and we wait for 2 seconds. So let's save this, and yeah, let's run it. So let's see what it's all about. So I'll run the test suite, and let's wait for that. So Ranorex is opening the debug information, and very soon the application will be opened. So here we go. We're inserting the name, then we are submitting. We are waiting for 2 seconds now, finally validating, pressing the reset button, and we are caught up with our report. And as you already can see, we have a warning occurred here. So it should be the warning of our submit message here. And this is how it looks like in our report now, we have first a warning here that the mouse button has been clicked, the submit button has been clicked, and then we have our information that we're waiting for 2 seconds. So this is what went out of our user code action. So this is, yeah, how easy it is to create such a user code and modify it. And I would like to show you now something different. So let's go again for this user code message. Here we have a button to open the arguments definition. So I could open it. And what you can see here is that we have now a dialog window where we can specify the number and the type of arguments which should be transferred into the method itself. So I could add a new argument here. I could give it a name. So let's call it my name. Possible string types are defined in here. So we have every basic type here like string, boolean, integer, rectangle, double, and so on, and also this repository item type here, so which means a reference to a repository item. And it also could be bound to some variable, of course. If I have a string, I could give it a default name, or I could bind it to any variable to give it outside, but we will stick to this a little bit later on. So this is how you can specify the arguments here. And as you can see, the default user code method returns void, so we have no value returned. And you could simply change this by simply replacing void by the data type you would like to have it returned and specify a return value at the end of this method in here. So this is, yeah, this is quite usual, and you should already know that. So let's show you something else. So let me close this and let me close that. And let's stick into the insert name recording module. Of course, it's possible not only to transfer each action on its own into user code, but you could also combine this. So I put those together, and you simply could select 2 actions and merge them into a user code item. So here I could merge them into a user code item, and let's call it insert the name. And I go for it with a double click. And what I can see now is, I put it a little bit outside, is that you could see now, of course, that the first part, the first action has been transferred with these two lines, so the report message and the mouse click action. And the second one is also report line and then the press keys action in order to insert the string name Harry into this user code method. And just to show you how we could simply transfer the value of a variable into this module, I step outside here of this recording module, and now I'm opening up. So let me make this a little bit larger here. So now I'm opening up the arguments dialog window, and I would like to transfer the name which is inserted in the text field by means of a value, so a variable. So I'm adding a new argument, and let's call it my name. So it's my name as an argument. It's of type string, of course, and it should be bound to some variable. So I would like to insert a variable which I call variable name. I don't need a default value, so I click OK, and I click OK. And what we have now here is, in the definition of the method, we have the method's name, and we have the repository item to perform the click on, and we have the string to transfer the value which should be inserted next here, and it's bound to the value of a variable. So this is how it works along. So I save this, I double click to open it, and now I could see also the argument in here. And what I do now is I simply add this value into my action here. So I don't insert Harry as a string, but the content of this variable, my name. So I'm inserting my name, the value of this variable, into the text entry field here. This is what I would like to do. So I save this simply and I close it. I close this too. And what I have here now is, of course, I have an information that I have an unbound variable. So my user code method is expecting an argument, a string argument, which is transferred from a variable outside here, and I now need to bind this variable to something, to an external data source or to a parameter or something like that. And I would like to show you this in the first step now with a simple parameter. So I step up to the test case here. I right-click here to open up the context menu, and yeah, I'm inserting now, I'm choosing the data binding, and I'm creating a new parameter, which I call parameter name. Oops, let's go for the naming conventions, parameter name, and I give it a new value. Let's type my name in, so Andreas, and bind it to my module variable of this user code module. And what I have now is I have defined a parameter here, and we have inserting the name with the user code method here. I would like to answer a very important question who was asked from the audience just right a few seconds ago. One attendee is asking us that they have very few testers who have coding knowledge, and it will be difficult for them to code. And it's very important for me to tell you that if you're using Ranorex Studio, there's no need for coding. So you need not code. What I show you today is an additional option. You can use coding within Ranorex Studio to enhance something, to make it smarter, possibly to make it faster, or simply to add things which are more closer to your solution. But you need not do that. Everything you can do in Ranorex Studio can be done without coding. So this is just an additional option, what I tell you here today. So here we go. Let me step back so not to lose the track. And now we have inserted here the value of the parameter into the user code. I simply run it now. So I should tell you that we are expecting a failure now within, because I show you something later, but let's open it up now and let me see how it works. So we are inserting now the name Andreas, hopefully, yes, we're submitting it, and we are waiting for 2 seconds, and finally we end up with a failure. And I would like to show you where the failure was. So we have a red pie chart now, which is not a good sign normally, because there's an indication that something went wrong. But what we changed didn't went wrong, so everything was okay there. So let me go step by step. So first of all, let me step into the inserting the name. So here within the test case, we have a parameter and it contained the value Andreas. Within the inserting the name recording module, we handled over this parameter to the local variable, and we put this into our user code method. We have a wrong message here, but inserted was Andreas. I will show you where. Then we clicked the submit button, waited for 2 seconds, but as expected, the validation went wrong, because we were still expecting Harry as a name and not Andreas. So Andreas was inserted, Harry was expected. That's why the test run failed, but it was not because we did something wrong. Inserting the name was okay, and I open it again. What I needed to change is here, of course, the message of the report. And I should change this, and I should tell you here, we could simply insert here that the value of a variable, so I add the value of the variable, my name, into the message here, has been inserted. So what I do here is I change the log file, and I I print out which name has been inserted into the text field. So let me save this again and just run it for you, that you see that everything is working fine here. There's one question: is it possible to do if statements in the code? Yes, of course. Within the code, you couldn't do everything you want to do. You can make loops, if conditions and stuff like that. So everything is possible within the code. But let me see, we have something gone wrong here. So I've made a mistake. Oh, here we go. I don't need that here, of course. So that's how it goes. Report level info value, now it should work. So let me close that again and now run the test and everything should work fine. So here we go. As you can see, the demo application is starting in a couple of moments. We are inserting now the value from the parameter, which is Andrea, submitting, waiting for 2 seconds, validating. There's a wrong validation, and finally we screw up. And when I open up the insert name here, then you can see we have, first of all, again, this is the parameter which has been defined up in the test case. This is the local variable which receives this parameter, which receives the value from this parameter and handles it over into the user code, which now has been inserted. It has been submitted, of course, but the validation went wrong, and this we will fix during this webinar. So we will fix the validation too, and then I'll show you how to implement the validation, a code-based validation inside. So let me stick to my agenda so that I don't lose grip here. Yes, I showed you the code representation of actions with the locked default code file and the user code file. I showed you how to convert a simple action or 2 or more actions into user code actions and to modify them. And you already saw how to pass arguments to user code actions. And yeah, now we will do the interesting part, because I would like to show you how to create real user code modules. So not just simply transferring or converting one action into a user code, but really creating our own user code modules. So this is what I'm going to show you next now. So let me close this report here, because until now we still have the recording modules here, and the recording modules inside contain user code actions. So this is not what we want in the long term. What I want to do now is I want to replace these methods here by real code modules. So let me first tell you how to create a new code module. Here I have already prepared a folder which should hold the code modules. Here we have a folder for the recording modules. We can see them inside here. And this is still empty here, so we have no code modules, but we could do that simply. Up here in the toolbar, we have a shortcut to add a new code module. I click it and I choose it to be hosted in the code modules folder. I click OK and I give it a name. Let's give it a name insert name. So I'm replacing the first recording module, which inserts a name. And what we have now, what we receive, is the basic code snippet for this user code module. So roughly explained, we have the implementation of different functionalities based on libraries. Then we have a namespace defined here. We have the class definition of our code module. We have an empty constructor in here. And finally, we have the run method, which is the heart piece of our code module, where we can, finally insert our user code. And I will start by showing you what to do now. If I start my demo application, then what should we do here? The answer is very simple. We could do it in different ways. We could first click into here and then perform a key sequence, or we simply could set the text value of this text entry field. But whatever we do, we need to have a repository item. And this is what we're gonna do first. We need to create access to our repository. And this is done by simple object instantiation. If I step back here, Within this file, I have my repository, and the file itself is called user code application repository. And if I double click it, then I have access to my repository here, and I need to have access to this repository item. And if I need to have access here, I need to have an eye on the names here of my rooted folder and the smart folder. So what I have is I access it through the namespace of my repository file and through the app folder, the rooted folder, and finally the repository item. So what I do here is now I step into here and make a call onto my repository. So it's user, and you see I have helping hands again, so I have already a suggestion. So it's user code application repository. This is the class, and I define an object name now, so I call it my repo for my repository, and I instantiate a new one, so a new user code application repository. So I have now instantiated a new repository object, which I call my repository. And now I have access to the complete repository by using this. So I call it my repo. And now I go down the namespace of my repository here. So I start by application under test, introduction pane, and text field name. So this is what I'm going to do. So I start by application under test dot introduction pane dot, and now I need to search for the text field name. And now I directly set the text value. So I go for the text value and I assign this text value my name here, Harry. Oops. So like this. That's what I did. It was very simple. I instantiated a repository object and I directly set the text value of my repository item with the value Harry. What I else could do is, of course, I could raise a message in here. So I go for the report.log, and let's do it with an information. So just to be clear, and inserted Harry into the text field. So that's what I did now. So just to make sure that we have it in the report. So I save it, I close it. I could also close my repository file. And what I do now is I simply replace the recording module. So I delete my recording module and I now insert my code module in here. So this is what I do. And what you see is now that I have a code module, a pure code module, instead of the recording module. It's very important for me to tell you, this webinar is not a lesson in software engineering. So for example, if I open it up again, the code module. So this is not a lesson in software engineering. You could instantiate this object outside of the method, of course. You could define it of being private and static or stuff like that. So there's many ways to do it in a smarter way. But what I want to show you is just what is possible, how to access a repository item. And I want to do that close together. That's why I do it this way. I know that you might have some design issues and design patterns in your company and that it looks much different there. But again, this webinar is not a course in software engineering. It's simplified to make you see how it is realized within the code modules here in Ranorex Studio. So again, I close this now and let us run this module and see if it's working. So let's see if our first code module does what it is expected to do. So we are expecting the demo application to start here. Now the name is inserted, it's submitted, we're waiting for 2 seconds, validated, and finally we end up. So we have a success, and let me point out the part where we want to be. So here we have it, the insert name, and there's nothing in here except our report information. we reported here that we inserted Harry into the text field. So this is what we did. And this is what happened during the test run. So to go a step further, I will show you how to replace the button submit method here. So again, we create a new code module, and it's a code module, and we call it button submit. So let's go for that. And yeah, finally, it's done in a very similar way. First of all, I need access to my repository. So I call it again my repo, and I instantiate a new repository object. So this is the first part. Now you can also use, of course, variables. So you need not directly include everything in one code line. So you could define a variable which you call, for instance, button submit. And you could simply assign it your repository item object. So I go for application under test, for introduction panel, and for the submit button, which is up here, button submit. And yes, that's all I need to do. So I have the assignment there, and then I could simply use my button and call it button submit dot click action, as you can see. So here we go. It's a method without any argument, and this is how I use this click button now. So for example, I have the simple click button now. There's again, now I have no message in here, so we will see that this code module doesn't raise any report information. So I want to show you that, so I simply click that. And again, I delete the recording module and I substitute it by my code module. And I simply will do that now, very shortly with the reset button, just to show you something different here. So again, a new code module for the button reset. And I would like to show you a different method of instantiating a repository. So if I open up my repository again, and I show you now, it's this repository item we need. So we need this repository item, and we could simply instantiate an object based on that. I drag it, so I click my left mouse button and I keep it clicked. I drag it up to my user code. You can see it's switching into the user code. Now I'm going down here, see the cursor following me, and I simply insert it here. So I release my repository item here, and just to make a little bit more places, what has happened here? So Ranorex is inserting a repository variable, which is instantiating the repository, and it's also creating a variable for the button, and it's assigning the correct repository item, which is the reset button, to this variable. And what you need to do now is simply make use of it. So I insert button reset dot click, and this is what I need to do. So it goes much faster and easier by drag and drop if you move it in there. Again, there is no report here, and we would like to do that. So here I insert a report with a log message, and as an information, the report level.info. Yes, and let's say it reset button clicked. So finally, here we have a message. So let me again save this and close it. Close the repository. Again, I delete the reset button and replace it by my code module. So what we have now already is we have an insert name code module, a module for clicking the submit button, for clicking the reset button, and finally what is left to do then is the validation, but we will show if it works now. So let me start it and see if it works. So we are opening now the debug information. And here we go. We're inserting the name, submitting, waiting for 2 seconds, and finally, oh, we didn't wait. We didn't have a wait in here. So what we have is a successful test run, and let's open up the submit button. And what you see here is that we did not raise any message here. So the report is empty when it comes to the button submit because there's no report message we inserted. When it comes to inserting the name, we raised a message in here. And when it comes to the reset button, there also is a message in here where we tell that the reset button has been clicked. And again, here we didn't do anything. So, yes, so far so good. We have replaced 3 methods now by code modules, but what I would like to show you now is something special because here in the insert name, we still have a fixed value which we assign, but very seldomly there are fixed values within some code modules. Most often you have values which are based on data sources or parameters or stuff like that. And I would like to show you how this has been realized within the code module section now. So let me introduce you to the concept of so-called module variables. So whenever we have a regular variable outside in a user code, it's the concept of a module variable in here. So let's assume we have our test case here, and within the test case, we have defined a data source. And the data source contains of a small table with different names to be inserted. So we want the test to run iteratively through all these names and perform the test case using one name after the other. The concept to transfer this into our code module here is that we need to define a so-called module variable within the code module, and this module variable bridges the outside world of the data source with the inside world of the code. So I could define a module variable here which is visible to the outside and can be bound to the external data source, and inside can be used to use the content of this variable within the code module. And this is what I would like to show you now. So let me now open up we already here the insert name, and let me go right underneath the class definition. So here we have the class definition, and here we are going to define a module variable. And defining a module variable is quite easy. I right-click here, and then I choose to insert a new module variable. And I give it the name variable name. So let's give it the name variable. I don't need a default value. I click OK. And what you receive here is the code snippet for the definition of this module variable. And what is much more important, you could leave this as it is, but what is much more important is that now we can use this variable inside here. So I could delete this fixed string here and simply could replace it by the variable's name here. So this is how I use. I change the text value to the value which is contained within this module variable. And I also would like to change here the message now. So we are not inserting Harry, but we are inserting the variable's value. So I put it in here. So what I have is in my report message that I print out, that I insert it, and then we have the value of the variable into the text field. So this is what we're going to do here. So very simple. I click save and I close this code module here. And what I have here now is, of course, an unbound variable. You can see that already here. And what we need to do now, so you see that the module variable, which has been defined inside of this code module, here the module variable is now visible outside here. And what we need to do is we need now to define a data source and bind it to this data source. So I right click here. In the test case, I choose to create a data source, a new data source. As you might know, we can handle CSV, Excel, SQL, but a simple data table will do for the moment, and I call it my names. And we need one column, which is name. Let's do it this way. And then we have 3 names here. Let's go for Harry. Let's go for Sally. Yes, and finally, let's go for myself. So it's Andreas. So we have a data source, and now we need to bind it. So before we have bound it to the parameter here. So I will delete the parameter not to raise any confusion. And now I want to bind my data source to the module variable here of my code module within the code module. So I click it in the checkbox. And now I have bound my module variable to my data source here. And what happens is, simplified spoken, we run this test and we will see what happens. So we're expecting the application to be started. Now we're inserting Harry as a first name, submitting, validating, resetting. Inserting Sally as the second name, submitting, validating, and boom, we have screwed up. Why? We have a very interesting report now. We have a successful test execution for one test case. We have a failed one, and the third one has been blocked. So this is what this pie chart tells us. And let me see what has happened. So let's first start with the successful test case. We have from the list Harry, which has been inserted. So the local variable takes Harry and inserts Harry into the text field. It submits it, but in the validation, of course, we are matching against welcome Harry as a fixed matching reference. So that's why the test case went okay. And when it comes to Sally, so we have Sally as a second data source, we submitted Sally into the local variable and put it into the text field. And when it comes to the validation, we still expect Harry to be inserted. That's why the current value was Sally. The matching reference was Harry. That's why we have a failure and the test aborted. So everything went fine when it comes to insertion, but of course we need now to change the validation. And this is what I'm gonna show you right now. So let me stick again to my agenda so that I don't lose and forget anything. So I have introduced to you now how to create a code module and how to use module variables to bring some content into a module, a code module. And now I would like to show you how to implement a user code-based validation. So this is what is left to do. So let me now create a new code module, which is within code module, and let's call it validate message. So here we go. What we have in here is now, let me stick to my agenda. Of course, we also need here now a module variable. This is the first part. Why that? Because the validation needs to be based on the data source, of course. So we step into here. Oh, was wrong. It was one too early. So let's step in here. So here we define the module variable which should hold the reference value. So we call this variable match name. Variable match name. Yes. So here we go. And I just commanded definition of reference value. And inside here now, we are able to define the assertion. And I have prepared this code snippet, so I will insert it now first, and I will explain it a little bit later on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm taking a code snippet which I have prepared, and now let me explain this to you. So I'm using the validation methods. This is defined within the Ranorex Studio API. So if you have experienced programmers, then they know how to access and use Ranorex's or any other program's API. So I'm using the validation object here and the equals method, and I'm retrieving from the from the welcome message. So we have the label welcome message here. I'm retrieving the text value here, and I'm combining it with the welcome text because the message is always combined with the welcome text and a sign out there, and I'm matching it with that. I'm matching it. If this is a success, then I'm matching it with the reference value here, and else I will print out a warning. So I have either I have a success or I have a warning depending on the reference value which comes from this variable's content here. So this is a very easy and straightforward validation. So there's no rocket science in here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm deleting now this recording module, and I'm using the validation code module here. And again, of course, I have an unbound variable. I now also need to bind this matching reference variable to my data source. So again, I'm opening up here the data binding, and I simply can bind the second variable to the data source too. So I bound now two module variables to the same data source. So that's how it goes. Yes, and it should be working now. So let's run this test and see if it's working. Oh, there's something wrong with my code snippet, I guess. So let me step inside here. My repo. Oh, of course, I need to instantiate the repository item. That's what went wrong. So I need an user code application, and I call it my repo. And I need to instantiate it. This is what I forgot, a new user code repository. So I forgot to instantiate the repository object here. Now I have it. It should work now. So let me again run the test and see if we have done it correctly. So again, we are waiting. Yes, we're waiting now for the demo application to start up and perform the data-driven test within here. Harry was inserted, submitted, and validated. Sally submitted, validated, reset it, and finally Andreas, hopefully, yes, submitted, validated, and it worked. So what you could see now here is that the report points out 3 successful test cases, and we just go for the last one here just to see. So what we receive here is from the data source, Andreas as the content, as the name. Within the inserting name, the local variable receives the value and inserts it into the text field, whereas the validation also has a local variable which receives the name and matches it with the reference value. And you could see the program was working properly. That's why the validation was a success. So as you could see now, what did we do so far from the last one to this one? Here we go. What did we do so far? I now showed you how to implement a user code-based validation. So we are almost done. And this brings me to the summary of today's webinar. I would like to show you 2 things now. The first is that everything I showed you today can be found in our user guide. So this is the first thing I would like to show you live here. So let me open up a browser window. Let's put it in here and go for Ranorex. And here we go. Through the support and the help center, you manage to, what do we have now here? Rather long waiting times or a problem with our website. So let me again do a restart. Yeah, here we go. Through the support and the help, we come to the landing page of the user guide. And within here, within the expert section, we have everything about the code module. So here you can see from an introduction of how to use module variables. So everything is in here, even with the option to download the sample files here. But I have something different for you. I should take this right from the beginning somewhere. So just let me show that to you. Yes, here we go. I have prepared today's example. So today's example, I have zipped into a file which is called Ranorex sample code module.zip, and you could retrieve it from ranorex.com/ericmedia/ericsuserguide/latest/download. Here you find the complete example of today's webinar, and you are free to download it and to try it out and to experiment with it. So this is an offer for you. So let me come to the end. What is to be expected next? You will receive a follow-up email during the day. So I need to prepare the recording now, do a little bit of cutting and stuff like that. So you will, during the day, a couple of 2 or 3 hours, you will receive an email including the on-demand video download link. And you could watch that video as often as you want to, could share it with friends or colleagues. And if it did not happen to ask all the questions, reach out at webinar@ranorex.com and we answer every single question. My name is Andreas Außerhofer. I thank you very much for your attention. It was a pleasure to be here with you today. I hope to see you soon in one of our upcoming webinars. I wish you a great day. Thank you very much and goodbye.